It's Super Mario Land. But hold up, I promise this is a very interesting question. Keep watching. Super Mario Land was the first handheld adventure for Mario. And while you could say that it is well known in the Mario community and that it sold 18 million units, it is not as remembered as it should be. So in this video, we're going to cover Super Mario Land and why it's forgotten. Alright, let's get into it. In 1989, the Game Boy released along with Super Mario Land, proving very successful, being taken around everywhere by children and adults all around the world, and proving to be very successful with its 18 million units. But how was it forgotten? Here's 3 reasons why that I'll cover. Here's the timestamps as well. This game was certainly different from the games that came before it. Instead of saving Peach in the Mushroom Kingdom, you're now saving Daisy in Sarasa Land, a new area. Even the power-ups you know and love have been changed. The mushroom and the superstar are relatively the same, but the fire flower has been replaced by a super ball flower. This power-up allows you to shoot balls all over the place, but it doesn't prove to be as useful as it's much harder to kill enemies now. Even the enemies you know have been changed as well. Instead of Koopas having a shell that moves around once you hit it, now they just explode, and I'm not even joking. Also, the boss fights have been changed. Instead of fighting Bowser, your main boss in this game is Tatanga. Even Mario is kind of weird in this game. He doesn't feel like the same as if he was controlled in the NES games, but he feels very difficult to control. And that's probably why one of the most reasons people don't really play that game this often, is because Mario is hard to control. His slippery controls are all over the place, and once he jumps, he basically locks in, and he can't move around afterward. Because of all of those oddities, most people just look at this game and think, oh yeah, it's that weird Mario game. So it doesn't really get remembered as much as it should be. Alright, now let's talk about... The Game Boy wasn't that powerful yet, and because it was still the early days of the Game Boy, they were still experimenting on how much power they could use, so they used a very small amount of power for this game. As a result, it ended up using very low quality sprites and only having 12 levels. That means that you can beat this game in 40 minutes if you're a speedrunner, and that just means that it's very forgettable. If you can beat a game in 40 minutes with levels that aren't very different from each other, is it really going to be remembered as much as your other counterparts that are much more creative? Speaking of your other counterparts had much more levels and power-ups and enemies. All of those things combined just makes it more memorable than this game. Well, that was a quick explanation, but let's move on to... A common trait in gaming is associated with handhelds. Most people assume that because games are on a handheld, they're either non-canon or they're just more forgettable and worse than their counterparts on the home consoles. But this is incredibly unfair because portable gaming is just as good as console gaming, if not better. But when you have a kind of bad game such as this one, it doesn't really help your argument of handheld bias. Which are you more likely to remember? Super Mario 64 and Super Mario 3D World, or Super Mario 64 DS and Super Mario 3D Land? Because these games are on a handheld, most people will play them less or think that the home console versions are better because of their power. And while it mostly just revolves around fun, sometimes Nintendo doesn't put as much effort into their handheld games as they do their home consoles. They still put a lot of effort into the handheld ones, just not as much as the home console ones. Let's just say that this game was overshadowed by its sequel. Super Mario Land 2 was much better than the first game in many ways. It included much more creative areas, it had way better sprites, used more of the Game Boy's technology and power, it was so much more fun with more power-ups, new areas, and so much more just creativeness in general. Super Mario Land only had 12 levels while the second one has 32. Plus, there's just so much more to do, and a ton of new enemies. There's basically no reason to prefer this game over its sequel, because the sequel just does everything correctly. And that's why I consider Super Mario Land the most forgotten Mario game. You can state your opinions in the comments below if you disagree with me, but that's just what I feel. I really hope you enjoyed this small video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.